All right, so this is a very broad, a very large topic to try and make any meaningful progress in a, 30-minute discussion. So one of the requests I have to the participants is, one, if there are any subtopics that I'm going to discuss today that you would like to see future workshops on to go into more detail, please put that in the Q&A section. But also, if there are topics outside of this one that you'd like either Calvin or I to talk about, we are actively looking for subject matter that is relevant and appealing to this type of audience. So Calvin's already set some of the context for how I'm going to present the way we identify and assess life science innovation for potential investment. I hope to make this as useful, not only for individuals who are also looking for investment opportunities in life sciences, but for organizations that may be looking for partnering opportunities, for acquisition opportunities, and they need to make sense of the what's out there in the life science space, whether they're technologies coming out of universities, they're pre-existing companies, so forth and so on. So yes, this is very much focused on therapeutics, vaccines, devices, and tools, and related technologies. We don't invest in, say, digital health or AI. That's not a judgment call. That's just we've created our parameters, and that's where we feel the most comfortable working in. We create the companies that we invest in. So we're a venture creator, a venture builder, a venture studio. There's different terminologies for that. Yes, we do get business plans from pre-existing companies, but we have to politely say, no, we don't invest in pre-existing companies. Thank you very much. So in some ways, we're very much focused on the technology that we're looking at out of that university or institute or national lab, both in the US or internationally. There's some elements of due diligence that we won't be addressing because we're not looking at investing in pre-existing companies. So we're not looking at the team per se. We provide the team. All the legal documents, agreements that come along with a pre-existing company, we're not, that's not relevant to us. And then, again, I want to make this as useful for a general audience as possible. So VIX parameters in any entity, any organization, you're going to have to set establish your guardrails, right? What are we interested in? What are we not interested in? That's very important. So you're not going down, a rat hole and you're pursuing technologies that really don't fit your core strategy. And so there are different ways to do that. One is, do you chase the market opportunity? And so the schematic on the upper right-hand side looks at the number, the amount of spending and the forecasted annual growth rate for different therapeutic areas. And you can see, in this coordinate pretty closely with the market opportunity, right? On oncology, immunology, diabetes, cardiovascular, and you work your way down the line through these top therapeutic areas. The downside is that, there's a lot of activity in these top therapeutic areas, so it's a very crowded space. So you have to be very certain that the technology that you are looking at, that you're evaluating, is superior to everything else out there that you can find, right? So you should be able to identify what's already in the market, what's a product, what are the characteristics of those technologies, what are the unmet needs given those currently available technologies, but you also have to go into what's in development, what's in the pipeline. And as you get earlier and earlier in the pipeline, that becomes more and more difficult, especially when you get to, say, preclinical stage opportunities. There may be no information about them in the public domain, but there may be, a technology that will eat your lunch once it makes it, if it makes it to the marketplace. Obviously, following the herd has its risks, as I've just mentioned. Your portfolio gaps, right? So for us, I showed in the previous slide the portfolio. We're pretty heavy in therapeutics and vaccines and nutrition, pretty well represented in diagnostics. Maybe we need to bolster our portfolio companies in the device and materials space and some other areas. For example, I've worked in bioprocessing for a good part of my career, and Filtrvate is a new membrane filtration technology in bioprocessing, but I think there are some really good opportunities also for different types of technologies in the bioprocessing continuum. So that's an area that we're actively looking at. Then your team expertise, right? So do you have folks on your team that have therapeutic area specific domain knowledge, right? Do you have PhD, MD type people who are very fluent in these different therapeutic areas? Maybe not all of them, but some of them, and those are play to your strengths there. Do you have folks that are more therapeutic area agnostic, but are more technology driven? Again, therapeutics, medical devices, diagnostics. And then the stage of your team's expertise. Do you have folks who have a lot of preclinical development experience, so early R&D through to say, 510(k), IND, et cetera? Do you have clinical and regulatory expertise on your team? Do you have commercialization experience on your team? And that whole continuum is very important to have, because not only do you need to know what it's going to take to get it to an IND or phase 1, phase 2, but ultimately what's the market opportunity, what are the reimbursement issues, so forth and so on. And on the lower right-hand corner, I'm just including a graphic that shows the VIC team as an example of those capabilities that we have. There's the core team, and it's a very diverse group of individuals with very diverse, experiences and expertise. We have the VIC board, and there are folks on the VIC board who have, extensive regulatory experience in medical devices, an ex-McKinsey consultant. That's just an example of the kinds of people that can bring input into your assessment of technologies. And then we've got a medical advisory board and a scientific advisory board that we can also tap into depending upon what kind of technology we're assessing. So now that you know the world or the universe of technologies that you are potentially interested in, or therapeutic areas or technology types that you would like to identify, how do you find them? And again, we're not going out to biotech companies. We're not taking, business plans or investments, information from pre-existing companies. So we're working with the source inventors of these technologies, universities, institutes, national labs. And so we have pre-existing relationships with many of these entities around the world. And we understand what their areas of expertise are. Certain universities may have centers of excellence in neuroscience or cardiovascular or medical device, Mayo Clinic, a lot of orthopedic opportunities there. UCSF, a lot of neuro opportunities there, so forth and so on. So we know what kinds of technologies we might want to go try and find at these centers. It's also very important for us and them to understand what our model is, right? We're going to create a company from scratch. We don't want the inventor to, be the CEO of the company. We are going to bring the management team, put that management team in place, but we do want the inventor of the technology, if the university's conflict of interest policies allow it, to be involved in the company as a very part-time, 5%, 10%, maybe CSO, CMO, CTO, help us apply for non-dilutive funding that I'll talk about in a moment, so forth and so on. We also want to make sure that their expectations for the term sheet or the license agreement are within, the ballpark of what we would like to see. So, for example, we're making a $500,000 initial seed investment in a new company to develop a therapeutic. There will likely be a number of follow-on rounds after that, but the goal is to get the technology to a point where it's now ready for a Series A investment. So the terms of the license agreement need to reflect that, no, we can't pay a $500,000 upfront fee, and that has happened. Where the university's tech transfer office says, okay, if you want the license to this technology, it will cost you $500,000 upfront. That's a non-starter for us. We don't want the entirety of the amount that we're investing into that new company to evaporate and go back to the university. We also need alignment on what do they expect for equity, what do they expect for royalty, and working our way down the different components of a term sheet so that it makes sense, because we want the bulk of the funding that we provide for these companies to go to moving that technology ahead. And by developing these relationships, hopefully they understand what we're looking for so they can proactively push information to us rather than are needing to contact them on a regular basis and say, well, what do you have that fits, again, our general areas of interest and our investment thesis? It's also important for us to periodically check in with these tech transfer offices because there is a high turnover. And I mean that both from the perspective of technologies. So technologies are being licensed and are no longer in play, but they have new technologies coming in on a regular basis, depending upon the size of the university. But also, unfortunately, there's a fair amount of turnover in the tech transfer office space. So, we've been having a conversation with an individual at a TTO, and then they leave, and then we need to reintroduce the VIC model to a new person, the replacements, and kind of restart the whole discussion about a specific technology. What about, sources of innovation that we've not worked with? How do we decide who to approach? One of it is, am I an alum of a particular university, or team members, alums of, different entities? And do they have a kind of a personal motivation to work with a Cornell or University of California or, Dartmouth or one of those? Sometimes we're approached at events or just, out of the blue via email by somebody at a university or institute or national lab that says, I saw your model, I saw your presentation, I heard this webinar, and I think we may have some opportunities that you want to take a look at. Great. Let's start the discussion. Let's talk about our model, what we're looking for, what we're not looking for, and then they can hopefully feed us curated opportunities. Obviously the far right diagram, those are the top 20 universities in the US based on R&D spend. The downside of going after sort of the larger, more well-known research universities is that in many cases, there's already a lot of interest in their technologies, right? So you're competing with other groups for that, and that would drive up the valuation. And then sometimes, these universities have pretty lofty expectations for the terms to license that technology to, in this case, a brand new startup. So that's something we also keep in mind. We've also had really good luck and great experiences working with, not the top 20 or even not the top 50, either nationally or globally, and found some real, hidden gems at these entities, and they're much, I guess, more flexible or more willing to provide terms that do make sense, again, based on a early stage, bridge the valley of death type of investor. And then how do you approach them? I always advocate for, aiming high within the organization. It's always best to start off with the head honcho of the tech transfer office and have them try and get as many people on that Zoom meeting when we talk about our model, so that the information is not compartmentalized or siloized, if that's even a word, right? Where there's one licensing officer who knows who we are and what our model is and what we're looking for, but there are other individuals in that group who do have technologies that would fit what we're looking for, but they just don't know about us. And then there are repositories, online repositories, InPart, Flintbox, the Autumn Innovation Marketplace. We use all of these. We tend to use InPart more often. One, because you can set up keyword search and they'll alert you when new technologies come based on those parameters. The quality of the information you can get from these different systems does vary substantially. And that's based on what the entity that posted the information is willing to put forth, right? So some of them are great. Some of them will include, links to scientific articles, links to patent applications. And some universities are really good about providing enabling information to make our lives easier, but sometimes it's just the bare minimum, and you really can't make heads or tails, which is kind of a disservice, right? Because if you're looking at hundreds, if not thousands of technologies, the easier it is for you to get that information, the more likely you are to move forward versus having to really hunt for that information. That kind of makes it more difficult to justify spending time on it. So what are the top selection criteria that we have when we are looking at a technology in our opportunity assessment team that we, if it makes it through that process, we would create that company, make that seed investment, I need to mention that in some cases, we really do like the technology, but it's not quite ready for us to create the NUCO. So we do have a foundry mechanism where we will pull the technology. We may have an option for it, but rarely would we have a license in that case into the VIC foundry. It's an entity in its own right, and that entity is the vehicle through which we would apply for, say, SBIR, STTR type funding to further de-risk the technology and get it ready for investment if that work is successful. So again, some of the parameters that we're looking for when we're evaluating technology is obviously market opportunity. Is there a significant market opportunity to justify the cost and risk to develop that technology? Our exit strategy is to get the company, the technology to a point where it is a potential acquisition opportunity. And that varies from therapeutics and medical devices to diagnostics. So, conventional wisdom with therapeutics is that you're going to need some sort of efficacy data in humans. So is that a phase 1B, a phase 2A? How much money is it going to take you to get there to reach that exit point? The bar is lower for medical devices, and the bar is even lower for diagnostics, again, as far as how far you need to get it and how much it's going to cost to get there. Who's the customer? Is the customer the patient, the physician, the payer provider, the government, right? You're developing a new vaccine, and that vaccine is going to be stockpiled by the US government, and that's it, one and done. And so it can vary substantially. Can you get feedback from potential customers? Do you have people on your team, physicians, who would use this technology if it became available? Do they like it? Do they see value and utility in it? Would they change how they do what they do now if this new product came onto the market? As far as the technology attributes, does it address unmet need? Is it substantially better than the current options? And that's where a lot of heavy lifting needs to come into place, because you need to understand what the current options are, what's in that development pipeline, and fundamentally, is your technology going to be better? Fewer side effects, longer lasting, less expensive, so forth and so on. And then quality of science, right? So we're a very science heavy in a very science heavy world, where if we believe the technology is going to address a significant unmet need and thereby garner large market opportunity, okay, how good is the science? Do we believe the claims that are being made? And that's where it really helps to have both the scientists and the clinicians involved in that due diligence process to say, okay, they used the right models. They had enough animals in those models. They were controlled appropriately. They repeated it. They did dose escalation. They had the right, placebos, so forth and so on. So that's a big part of our value add when looking at these technologies, is that we can really make sense of the science. IP protection. We're looking at pretty early stage technologies. So we want to see that there's a patent application. Sometimes we'll be able to see that there's been a response from the examiner. Even rarer is that the patent has issued. But we do come across technologies where it's been 4 or 5 years since the patent application was submitted, and they do have issued patents with claims. And that's optimal because we know what the value of the IP portfolio is, versus there may be value, there may not be value by the time the claims are actually granted. Has nationalization deadline passed? Has the university been able to file in foreign jurisdictions? Most universities don't have the budget to go after nationalization. Some do. In some cases, you're too late. That deadline has passed and you're stuck with just US. That may not be a major issue, depending upon the technology. For some, it may be a deal breaker, and everything in between. The quality of the inventor. So for us, we want the inventor to be involved in, if possible, if they add value in the NUCO. And we can really suss out during the due diligence process what it's going to be like to work with the inventor on a long-term basis. Are they willing, able, eager to answer our questions? How do they handle questions, right? Do they take offense that we're somehow challenging the validity of their work? No, we just really need to understand it and dig really deep into it. Do they have reasonable expectations for their role? If they're expecting, a 51% or higher equity stake in the company day one, they're expecting to be CEO, they want to leave their faculty position to be on the company, that doesn't work with our model. It might work for other, organizations models, but for ours, that doesn't really stand up. And then just interpersonal. Do you want to work with the inventor? So managing directors like myself will serve as the interim CEOs for our newly formed companies for, between 3 and 5 years. And I will work very closely with that inventor during that time frame. It may start to decrease over time as the technology advances, evolves, and really makes its way out of kind of the basic research setting. But do I feel like I could have a good rapport with that inventor and that, we're going to have a productive working relationship? Development timeline, capital needs. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but, for us, 500,000 initial investment, follow-on rounds. We are very aggressive at bringing in non-dilutive funding. I'll talk about it in a second. But with the combination of the two, can we move the technology forward to reach meaningful milestones? Or, with 500,000 day one, we're not going to be able to make any difference in the technology. It's going to take millions of dollars during, at the inception of the company to actually move things forward. So that also obviously comes into play. And then the funding environment, right? So we're trying to get this to a Series A ready opportunity based on what we know now. Is this therapeutic area, this technology type, seen by institutional investors as an area of interest? Or is it going to be difficult to raise that Series A when we're ready, when we get to that point? Obviously, non-dilutive funding, as I mentioned, is critical to these companies. So SBIR, STTR type grants. We also go after contracts, NIH, NSF, DoD. Sometimes there are state and regional funding sources, matches that we can tap into as well. So that is also part of the calculus as far as when we create this company, where are we going to place it? Do we place it adjacent to the inventor? Do we place it adjacent to the interim CEO? Or is there some other rationale for having it someplace other than that? So, what are the major, the top NIH institutes based on budgets? And therefore, where are you more likely to raise that phase 1 SBIR and that phase 2 SBIR? NCI, NIGMS, NHLBI. I would say that probably 90% of our companies are going after or have technologies that are relevant to those top institutes. And that's not always intentional, but it just tends to be where we gravitate towards because we've received funding from these institutes. We know what the process is there. We've had good results, good experiences with those institutes. And this is the last of the selection criteria slides. So I touched on this earlier, licensor expectations. What does that tech transfer office expect for us to secure a license for that newly created company? And, we work at tech transfer offices on a regular basis. So we've seen a lot of different term sheets and a lot of different components of term sheets and wide ranges of terms in those agreements. And so I wrote a white paper on this subject previously. So I just took the graph from that and shows typically what we've seen for the expected range for that term by the university, and then what the startup is really looking for, right? I'm not saying that one perspective is right or wrong, but there are different motivators, different considerations for those two different entities, and hopefully being able to meet to a point where it makes sense for the startup and the investors in the startup is critical. Often what we see too, and this is for companies that I've been with before, is that a license was negotiated for that startup, and now the startup is raising their Series A round, and the investors come back and say, well, no, these terms don't make sense for us in our viewpoint. Go back to the tech transfer office and renegotiate this to get it in alignment with what we need to see to make that $5 million, $10 million Series A investment. So it's always better to negotiate terms that have viability beyond the first 2, 3, maybe even 5 years. And then inventor expectations. We've had to walk away from technologies because in some cases there were 3 or 4 co-inventors, and they all expected, pretty hefty consulting fee from the new co for them to be involved, for them to help write SBIR proposals. And that's, doesn't make sense given the capital that we're investing, and we want to, again, allocate as much of that funding towards moving the technology forward and not have it being drained very rapidly by these, I don't know what you would call them, adjacent requirements. Obviously, we want to keep them, involved and excited about the opportunity. And in some cases, will they be willing to speak about the technology, the company, the science at key events, scientific conferences, disease-focused conferences, investor conferences? Would they be willing to be involved in, pitching or presenting to potential investors and/or partners? So one of the things I want to touch on is how can the licensor group, the university, the institute, the national lab, help support groups like us, prospective investors, partners, acquirers? Probably not going to see many in the way of acquirers at this early stage, but definitely you will see investor groups and potential larger organizations, biotechs, pharma, med device, diagnostic companies that are potentially interested in licensing an asset from university. And one of the biggest elements that helps us that I again touched on earlier is have the supporting information readily available. If not immediately, get it to us within a couple days, because we tend to move on to the next technology pretty quickly, especially if we're getting that information for that technology and we haven't gotten the information that we need to start the assessment process for the other opportunity. Our attention span is finite. In some cases, the university will provide a really well-prepared 1-page or 2-page summary. And I'm giving a shout out here to Albert Einstein College of Medicine. This is just one example of how it can be done, where they've provided almost an executive summary on this technology. And that says a lot to us. It says that they value this technology enough to, put person hours into creating this document. But they've also linked it to scientific publications, the IP, who the contact is. There's some nice data included. So, my team of 15 in opportunity assessment can all look at this and really make an educated decision on our initial go, no-go step. Also be aware that many investors will not sign an NDA because it becomes unmanageable to have an NDA in place with, hundreds, if not thousands of different organizations. Or if they do, they prefer a blanket agreement. So we will sign NDAs, but we prefer it to be a blanket NDA. So there's not a new NDA for every technology that we're looking at that university. It's easier just to put that blanket NDA in place, have it for 3 to 5 years, so we don't have to continuously, read through these documents and sign these documents. One of our first steps after making that initial go, no-go decision is we want to have a presentation from the inventor. And most inventors, I don't want to, generalize or stereotype here, but most inventors, they're scientists, right? They've been working on this subject matter for 10, 15, 20 years, all their career, very deep into it. We don't want it to be a data dump, right? We really want to get a nice overview. We want them to have thought about, or maybe in assistance with their tech transfer office, have considered some non-science elements of the technology, right? So have they thought about the market opportunity? What is the IP status and strategy? What do they think the product development timeline, at least the early stage initial aspect of that, will be? What's the competition? Barriers to market entry. We don't expect them to have a fully fleshed out, business plan, but if they've put some thought into this, that is very encouraging to us. And a lot of that support can be provided by the tech transfer office. So the lower right, excuse me, I'm showing our template email out to the tech transfer office to say, we'd like to request a presentation from the inventor, hour long, 40 minutes for content, 20 minutes for Q&A. Here's a rough outline. To the extent that you can help them create this, we appreciate it. And that goes a long way if they do indeed take that to heart. And then systems, right? So we're a dispersed group of individuals across the United States. Sometimes we have folks internationally involved in the opportunity assessment process. How do we easily collaborate on our due diligence process? So we use HubSpot. A few years ago, back actually about 4 or 5 years ago, I did a fairly thorough assessment of different technologies that could be used to, for deal flow, program management. And HubSpot came out on top because not only is it through their deal element allow us to really facilitate not only opportunity assessment, but it also allows us to capture, activities for fundraising for a portfolio company or, business development partner outreach for a portfolio company or investor relations for Vic. So it's multifaceted. There are multiple pipelines that you can create. There's no limit to that. We also use it as our CRM and our marketing automation tool. So some of you may get the Vic newsletter every month. That's sent out via HubSpot. All the content that's on our website is contained within HubSpot. So it's really a nice multifunctional application for us. But from the point of deal flow, we can use these Kanban card views that are staged, right? So we have initial screen. Initial screen is where somebody's found the technology one way or another, and we may have very minimal information. We may have a 1 or 2 page summary from InPart. There might be one scientific article. There might be, a published patent application, but it's very bare bones at this point. We want the team on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being highest. What do you think of this technology? And what are your concerns or what questions do you have? And based on that, if it gets sufficient interest, it'll move to prospect. The key thing about moving to prospect, though, is that there has to be an owner. There has to be a person who's on the hook to make sure this continues to move and just doesn't, wither on the vine and languish, right? So that's a big part of that process. The supporting information, so in the lower right, that's if you were to click on one of those technologies in the Kanban card view or the Monopoly property card view opens up, and you can see we have activities, notes, and emails and calls. We have links to Dropbox, which is where we keep all the supporting information, Word files, Excel files, PowerPoints, PDFs, etc. So people can access it, but we can also assign tasks, right? So Michael, schedule an inventor presentation, and there's a due date. And if I miss that due date, people can see it. So there is ownership and visibility so that if somebody's falling down on the job, we know who's responsible for it, and they are motivated, therefore, to keep that technology moving. And again, make those series of go, no-go decisions. In prospect, we're going into deeper due diligence. Active is where, yes, we think that this is a startup opportunity. We're moving full speed on this. If it's something that we still have some unanswered questions, or the inventor is going to have some animal data coming out in 6 months, they're waiting on a grant to be funded, we'll put into tracking. If it's something we decided not to move forward with, it's an archived. But that's very important that we can search and find that technology should we come across it in the future, or something very similar. We can say, okay, this looks a lot like this one that's in archived. Why did we decide to pass on it? And is that rationale valid for this newer opportunity? So I've talked a lot about this. This just gives you a visual of how we've stage gated our due diligence process. And this is my last slide. So just kind of summarize, in essence, we're trying to get to know as quick as possible without spending too much time and effort on something that ultimately we're not going to move forward with for a number of different reasons. And the top criteria are, again, listed here, but we may be looking at up to 1,500 technologies per year, but most of those don't make it through initial screen. So we're, again, minimal amount of time and effort. And sometimes it's just because we didn't get the information we needed to make to move it to the next step. lack of responsiveness, or it just took too long to get the information that we needed. So that does happen. And then getting down to, at the end of the day, what we're looking for is 3, maybe 4 new codes to be formed any given year. Obviously, some organizations have a much larger funnel, and they're looking to make 10 new investments or 20 new investments. They may not be venture creators. They may be, institutional VCs. And so they're screening business plans or executive summaries or pitch decks in this case. But a lot of the fundamentals, I hope, are the same.